Good evening, everyone. Um, this is my second live stream. It's something I'm doing to um, break social isolation and um, k- keep my communication skills up. And as I go through the next few months, I'm really focusing on doing as much as I can to go through a healing process that I've been working on for a while. And it's a way of monitoring my own progress and keeping myself accountable to myself. But I also like the idea of um, communicating with others and uh, sharing sharing positive aspects to the journey that you go through. I want to hear other people's stories. I'm not necessarily going to go into any of the actual traumatic events that caused my complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't think that's necessary, um, but I will, from time to time, talk about experiences that are personal. Um, but I do want to hear from other people what they are going through and what their experiences are like. Um, I did my first live stream last week, and that really went well for me. I got a lot of um, feedback from people, and um, I like that it sort of there was people from all over the world that joined in and um, heard me talking for so long. But I like to think that it was constructive, and I'd like to get better at what I'm doing. So I can only get better at what I'm doing by doing it, and that's how you learn. You learn by doing. And one thing I found is I've gone from being a very talkative person to not talking much throughout the day, and this is great for me because it means that I practice my communication skills, even if I'm just talking um, to a screen. But I'm not really talking just to a screen. If I'm here and there's someone there listening, there is a two-way window that they can communicate back to me and through the chat, and then I can respond. So I I think that there's a lot of beneficial aspects to the whole concept of live streaming. Um, I I tend to wait for things and then look at them, and then I decide whether it's something that I'll try out or not. And it's come to the point where um, just for my own self, it's such an important thing for me to actually do at this point. So um, I'll keep working on this. So if people do join and they've got something to say, um, I'd like to hear and could get a conversation going like what happened last time. and if not, I'll just be speaking to myself, but to you. And main thing is doing something like this where I don't have a script. I'm just talking. So there will be moments where I'm searching, or I'm lost, or just thinking about what I just said and thinking about what I'm going to say next. So um, there's a part of that is you've got to bear with me with that, but at the same time, it's keeping it real. Um, what what I put in the thumbnail is I wanted to make it personal about what it's like for me and how my life has been shaped by these things, um, and how much it's affected my life over time. I I try to look for the good in things. Um, I try to look for a positive outcome, and that allows me to get through tough times. And because I've been through tough times, I understand that it's um, the struggle is not necessarily needed to the point that I've gone through, and what I've gone through is certainly nothing compared to what other people have gone through. So I don't want to make comparisons, but I will sort of go into this point a bit because it's something that's very sensitive to people that have suffered complex trauma, or any form of trauma, really. But um, I guess the more complex it is, the more it is difficult to actually try and converse your experience to others. And often, when I would explain some of the things, I would find it the reaction I get from others would actually cause me to shut down. So I would I would say what was on my mind and what was causing me to be in distress, and um, people would sometimes have a opposite reaction that almost sort of make fun of the situation, which I can understand does. uh, People will make light of a situation in order to sort of ele- people will make light of a situation to try and shut it away, and maybe they can't handle it, or it's also their way of making it less stressful for the person who's going through that moment. um, but that can be quite a negative thing. So when telling people about what some of the things that you've been through, and you get a reaction from them that's not positive, it can cause you to not want to tell people, which is understandable because you don't. Most people who've been through trauma, that we don't want to share our trauma with others, um, without, like, we don't want it to affect them, and so we'll keep it inside. And when explaining things to people, their reaction will actually show a lot about the person themselves, but you can't hold it against them for having an adverse reaction to your um, proclamation, um, because everyone deals with these things differently, and some people, what you're trying to explain to them is so extreme that they can't empathize, and then so you feel like you just can't say anything. And often with the complex trauma that you might have gone through, um, you're you're not able to happily talk about it. So you don't want to, you don't even want to be talking about it, but something's happened in your day that has caused you to say, um, to someone, I have had major events happen in my life and they've affected me and they are still affecting me now. And when you get a encouraging empathic response, people will give you courage. Um, when people are understanding, it it gives you much more, and you can actually move on from that, and you can sort of collect yourself and realize that you're doing pretty well. So sharing your vulnerability will actually be a positive in a lot of situations. There will be the times where you explain things to people and they can't handle it or they don't know how to deal with what you're saying, and their reaction actually causes you to be upset. So knowing when to be quiet and when to voice yourself is important. I've got some comments here, like part of these live streams is I want to engage with the people who join. Um, so we've got a few here. I'll just read them. I don't know whether to read them out loud. I'll read them out loud. Um, we got a couple of comments from Lara. I really love your courage. Keep on going. Unfortunately, I live on the other way around of the world, but I feel you like a brother. I'm working at the moment, but I'm listening to your words later. Listen to your words later. Yeah, thank you. You see, keep working. Um, I'm not working at the moment. I'm carer for my mother, um, but I do find working is a very crucial thing. So I'm still working, doing what I do, but it's not the same as holding down a full-time job, which I did for most of my life. I'll keep talking, so I hope you're listening. I hope I'm able to keep communicating in a way that it's worth listening to. So that's something I'm striving to get better at. So bear with me while I start these live streams and I get better at having a smooth flow of words. Yeah, so you listened to the last live. So I'm continuing on the comments. But from the last live, I did have just one question for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts in front of the sunrise. So that's a great idea. I this week I like this last week I got to see the sunset twice, which was great. Um, and I'm going to aim for 3 times this week if I can. And I'll take you up on that and I'll do that. I'd like to I'll go and get up early and I'll go and watch the sunrise and I'll set the camera up and start talking. I'm going to do that. That's a really great idea. Um, it continues on, and I feel for you. I feel nobody, even my parents, really knows what your deep emotions are, and it feels like a prison where I live all my life. I I totally get that. That is, you do feel like you're trapped, and because um, you can have people that are so close to you, and yet because there are these things that you can't express to them, um, you, you feel like you feel distant, even though you have people that are around you and loving and care for you, and um, there is this sort of it is like a prison, and it's not a self-imposed prison. You've been placed there, but I think looking at like that, you you got to hold on to hope that you'll be let out one day, and that you were wrongfully imprisoned. So you have to forgive the system that put you there, and you have to forgive the people that hurt you. In a way, you can't do it completely. Well, I can't. I'm talking from my own experiences that um, it does letting go of enough, as much of it as you can, in a form of forgiveness, will make you stronger. But you don't, like, it's the same as letting go of pain. That if pain has taken control of you for so long, um, there is the fear that letting go of the pain, you'll not be able to, um, things won't be the same, and there is a thing where you're afraid of it, and it's afraid of being afraid of the change. I appreciate that. Ladis Kadata. I hope I said that correctly. Thank you. Like, I'll keep doing this and I'll keep working on myself, and I'm going to try and get a conversation going between survivors of this trauma that exists in this world. Um, and I appreciate the comments that you've put up there, like, and given me like a great idea for this sunrise session. Oh, nice. Just like you're the icon. It's the square root in Italian. Thanks for your wise words. Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I I'm trying to just speak my mind and just let's what's happening come out my mouth and be something that's not only worth listening to, but it's also something that it's my truth. So um, if if something doesn't resonate, then you don't have to think it's um, the truth. That's uh, my experience is my experience, and I've learnt some things from these experiences, and if I can share that, and if it's beneficial, then I really feel like I'm doing the right thing. So going back over the last week, I didn't have expectations for achieving a lot, but wanting to, what I was wanting to achieve was to get enough done through the week so that I progress a little bit, and that's something that I'm sort of focusing on as I move forward, so that I can get the most out of things. And I guess the way I'm looking at it is that you go, um, there's the sayings of one step forward, two step backwards, and that's what you don't want. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to uh, appreciate and understand that not everything's going to work out. So I'll aim for three steps forward, two steps backward, or three steps forward, one step backward. Understanding that there's only going to be so much forward momentum before there is like a negative or reverse momentum, and that if I include that in my expectations, then I'm not going to be let down when I do have um, a week where I don't achieve much. Um, and then that reminds me that when I have a overall trend of growth and healing, um, it means that all of the things that I've been doing count. So things that don't necessarily um, work out in a positive way, they're still helping me because I'm still making the effort. And a few failures are actually expected. When I when I look back over this last week, I actually did achieve a lot, and I did a lot of things throughout the week that were for me and for my family. Um, and I got to see the sunset a couple times, and I spoke to some friends. So I'm breaking that social isolation where I'm reaching out to people. I did some medical things where I looked at, I had a health issue a few weeks ago, and I had to get it checked. done, which was a little bit scary because there was the uncertainty of I could be unwell. Luckily, the test came back showing that I do have a health situation, but it's something that's manageable and repairable, and I just have to do the right things to make that make myself healthy um, in as quick a time as possible, and to not do the things that will actually make it worse. So I'm glad to have gotten through that, um, and maybe next week will be different. This coming week, so I really appreciate that. Ladiscadata. Thank you. Like if I'm saying the right things, and it's resonating with you, then I'm doing things right. So I'll go back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier about um, what it's like trying to explain to people why you are a certain way, and why you have been a certain way, and um, it's not easy. And like I was saying, you get mixed responses, um, but it is good to be forgiving and understanding of the people's reactions because of that, because people um, have difficulty in comprehending complex trauma if they haven't gone through it themselves. There is a there is the unknown. Like, the worst thing is when, for a lot of my trauma, is that I don't want to tell people, and there was a lot of things where I couldn't tell people, and so um, you have whole periods of your life where you're keeping stuff inside, and you don't know how to even approach the subject. And then you may have had, like I've had, negative um, negative reactions from people, either when talking about explaining particular things, or just the overall debilitating aspect of surviving this multiple complex traumatic events. Uh, it's even more difficult when you're conscious of the seriousness of the situation, and you're you're trying to express to someone how these things really affected you, and if they don't want to listen to you, you feel like you're being shut down. If they downplay it, you feel like it hurts because they're minimizing something that you've gone through and making out like it's nothing. Um, in the really negative uh, responses, you'll be accosted, like, so you'll be made to feel bad for even bringing the subject up, and that uh, these are all things that will cause you to keep things inside and not express them. So with being being able to come to terms with what it is that you've lived through, and going through a forgiveness of some of the things, to the extent that you can possibly do, because there is a beneficial effect of doing that. You are letting go of things. It will make things better, but I don't think it's possible to forgive in a whole, complete sense, because these are things that have damaged you so much. But you have to somehow let go of some of it, and then retain the things that have made you stronger. Because part of going through these things is that it has made you stronger and more resilient. So if you're wanting to just, you can't, if you let go of everything, then you're going to let go of the things that have also made you stronger. So you don't want to have to start from the very beginning again with nothing. And I've felt this several times, where you go through this big process and you feel like you're letting go of things and you're achieving some goals, and you're able to not suppress the constant reliving of the trauma, but you're able to not pay attention to it. Um, when you do those things, you get to a point where your life has changed. You've lost things in the process. You haven't succeeded at other things in the process, and you feel like you are back to zero and you have to start again. So maybe that's why I don't want to completely forget. It'd be nice to completely forget. But then if you do, you're getting rid of all the things that have educated you in your life, the things that have made you stronger, and the things that have allowed you to get through tough times. Going through like a life change and shedding too many things can be too much. So there's like a it's almost like at least I have I've been able to let go of enough of the trauma, and I've been able to let go of enough of the trauma in order to remember happy moments. So one of my um, most upsetting things in my life is that because growing up and then through adolescence and then even into my adult life, I had so many traumatic events that um, my memories were only of the trauma. And I felt like I didn't have any happy memories of growing up. And I felt like I was lacking I was very sad about that. So when I went through this process of consciously forgiving people as much as I could and going through this process of acknowledgement and moving on, what happened to me was is I was able to start to remember some of the happy times. And that to me is very special because I was able to live back through my life and smile to myself and connections with people that were distant and disrupted because of the pain. Those connections were sort of healing in a way, and they are still healing, and they're sensitive, but it there is a a great hope for the future for me in that is that the more I can go through a focused healing and strengthening, the more I can have these positive memories come back to me and these positive connections with people be re-emerging and strengthening. So I have a difficult time ahead. My mum's not well, and um, I've been healing myself from a traumatic event that happened last year. I've got a lot to I've got a lot to focus on, and I've got a lot to do in order to get to where I want to be. And I know that I do a bit each day, and that's gonna really keep me focused. One thing I find with self improvement is that if you try to do too much too quickly, it will end up in failure. So my way of approaching it is to do a little bit of what I can, but don't go backwards. So that's sort of like what I was talking about with the 3 steps forward, 1 step backwards. It can be 3 steps forward, 2 steps backwards. Um, you're still going to end up 1 step further ahead. And acknowledging the fact that that is the give and take and the ebb and flow and the way things at work will give you that additional strength for persevering with it. And I think that's a big thing, is sticking with things that will help you long enough for them to actually have an effect that's beneficial. A lot of times people give up on things because they try it and they don't get any results, and then they see, oh, it's not working, and then give up. But if they'd only stuck with it just that little bit longer, that's when you'll get the positive effects. So for me, I'm really grateful for people that really took the time to talk to me when I had the courage to talk about some of the events and experiences that I had, that I could not keep inside any longer. So I had to say something. So compared to getting a few negative responses, it was overwhelmingly positive. So it's worth doing. If you feel that you can't, you have to say something and you have to tell people, talk to them. You don't you're not going to get a good response from everyone, and understand that things are too complicated for people to understand, and people have a memory of you. So if you've had complex trauma and at some point um, you have to explain what happened, you're going to change what people's memories of you are. And it's like they will reject certain things because they don't want to have their memory of their own life. So it's the more history you have with people, there will be more difficulty in them accepting things. But overall, my experience was that people really cared and wanted to let me know how much they understand what it's like, and I had a lot of people tell me about their experiences. and how difficult it was for them and how things get better. So it is okay to talk, but knowing what to say and when to say it is very difficult because if it's the right time and it's the right person, you'll get a really good response. If it's the wrong time and the wrong person, then you're not going to get a positive response. And this is really difficult because these are often things that you keep inside because you either don't want to talk to people, you don't want to share the trauma and make them feel bad, or they're things that are so horrific that you just can't talk about. And so it's not easy. Um, you might find that you've expressed to um, people in a professional situation or people that you would expect to have an empathic response to what you're saying, and they have a cold or a callous response, and it can be heartbreaking because you've gone to that place where you've expressed what you've been through, and the response that you get can you've made yourself vulnerable, and then it's like you're being laughed at in a way, or it's being downplayed, and that's not nice. But understanding that it will it it will be part of the process of explaining things, that it isn't easy. What I often did growing up was basically just say to people that I had these really traumatic things happen, and I'm really messed up by them. And that's a way of explaining without actually going into details. But it doesn't go anywhere past that. And the more vague you are, the less people are going to necessarily understand. And then you think, well, why am I even sharing this stuff? Why am I even telling people these things? Like, they don't want to know. And now that they do know, they've got a different perspective about you. And it's changed your relationship with them. So um, there is a self censorship, or whether it's worth actually going through the process or whether to just keep things inside. I think overall, getting some help, being able to explain, being able being able to talk, it really it's needed. So finding someone that you can talk to really helps. Like if it's a friend, that's good. If it's a professional like a therapist or a psychologist, that's good. If it's a family member, that's good. If it's a stranger, That's good. Um, I've felt more comfortable explaining difficult situations with strangers than I have with people that I know really well. I guess there's a sort of like a anonymity that you have. You're not going into details, but I was thinking about this the other day, how much, you can be reminded of the positive aspects of humanity from strangers, and how they can actually sense, they can see you, and they can tell you're having a tough day, and maybe they're having a tough day themselves, and sharing sharing the toughness and difficulty in a positive way is, for me, it reminds me of the positive aspects of humanity. I appreciate these sort of encounters that I have had in the past, where I've had an extremely difficult day, and I've just, in meeting someone for the first time, a complete stranger, and being vulnerable enough to say that you're having a tough day, and they can sense it, and they say, "Yeah, I'm having a tough day too." But they don't make you feel bad about anything. They're reassuring you that there is goodness out there in the world, and that people will pay attention. And if you if you put yourself out there in a positive way, people will see that. The ones that are looking, the ones that are aware, they'll be able to see it, and they will remind you that things can be difficult, but there's also this goodness in the world. I think we all have this sort of inability to communicate, and so we communicate in a way that things words can be expressed, but we're so affected by everything that's going on in our daily lives. We're so affected by the political outlook. we're so affected by oppression in the form of um, inequality and um, we're coming from different places, and so getting words to make sense, it's not easy. Being authentic helps. So I'm just here chatting. Like if I don't make sense, then it's because I'm not reading from a script. I'm just talking. But if I can be authentic enough, then what I'm saying is not lost because it comes from a real place. Communication is such a difficult thing. There is this there is this thing where the more something is close to you, the more you want to protect it. And so the more like the things that really affect you are so precious that you want to protect them. And it's difficult because the things that are so close to you aren't always things that you really want to hold on to. So the complex trauma actually takes over and it fills up the space that should be filled with other things. I communicate in a way that I try and be deliberate and honest, and I don't overdo things. I don't over explain things, but that might not necessarily help me because sometimes I need to explain in more detail, but then I'm afraid to explain in too much detail. It is such a difficult thing to just communicate. And for me, like I had the difficulty of having all of these things that I felt like I couldn't talk about. And then I finally got around to talking about some of the things long after it was almost like it was too late. And it was too late. The thing is that these things that you can't talk about are a communication problem. So I think of a big part of my traumatic experiences were not being able to talk about them, or feeling like no one's going to care, or that if I do talk about these things that I'll get in trouble. So I learned a, a pain. I learned to have an association of pain with communicating. So it really is something that is, it's so simple, and it's so much of a core aspect to existence in a collective way, and yet it's so profoundly affected by the effect of the complex trauma. So you have a voice, but then you feel like you can't express anything, or anything that's important. And so you think, well, what's the point of having a voice if you can't even speak? Or if you go to speak, um, you're told not to speak. It's very painful. And I think that a lot of people who've survived situations are all living through the same thing, where you can't you can't properly express to others. So having a place where you can really helps. So for some people, they have social groups where they can communicate to others what it's like, and the struggles that they're living with, and that could be friend networks, they could be clubs, they could also have therapy groups where it's within, um, it's not one on one. You've got a group of people and they're sharing their experiences. So communicating has a lot of forms, and overall it's difficult, and it becomes more difficult when you're trying to communicate when you have existed in through traumatic situations. What it does also mean is that authentic communication is appreciated more. Like I was saying before about when you meet a stranger and you sense that they're having a bad day, or they sense you're having a bad day, and they basically open up to you and share a little bit of an insight into how they stay positive, and they give you something to lighten your day. That form of communication to me is special. And I don't think that is achievable unless there is the authenticity. It's like the people associate and understand without even having to communicate. I think a lot of it is shown through body language and facial expressions and things. I want to talk about my difficulties in communication in respect to things like body language and facial expressions, because those are actually traumatic things for me. Is part of my complex trauma is narcissistic abuse and bullying and being treated a certain way by people at certain times, which then basically become traumatic in the sense that humans themselves are a trigger. So you want to then more isolate yourself from social situations, and that doesn't help because we are social beings. So we are humans. We've evolved to live solitary, but also be in a collective. So it's not easy. You have, I mean, just I'm sitting here right now. I'm trying to basically have a conversation where I'm just letting it happen. So I'm talking about communication and how difficult it is, and I'm sitting here communicating. So it's like a contradiction, and I hope that I am explaining myself in in a way that is able to be understood. Doesn't mean that I don't have these difficulties with communication. I mean, I have such difficulties with it. So for me, people's body language and facial expressions can actually trigger me and cause me to shut down, become fearful, become very upset, or it can actually just it can trigger a response that I don't actually realize what the actual trigger was and what the response was until later on. So I'll be in a situation where whether it's work or friends or anything, I'll be talking with someone, and their body language and their expressions will trigger something in me. And at the time, it's basically disrupted our communication ability. It'll be long after the conversation and after I might have been stuck in a cycle of triggered replaying of traumatic events for hours afterwards until I can actually clearly think enough to go, why was I triggered then? And then think back and then go, okay, now I understand. I'm it was that. It was a particular thing. And when I am able to do that, and I am able to think about what it was that caused me to dissociate, depending on how much effect it has, whether it's mild or acute, I'm I'm able to learn from it and better myself, better my communication abilities. And sometimes it's worked where I've been able to not be affected or triggered when I'm in those situations. And just the very nature of communication, conversing, being something that is so easily triggering, it makes existing difficult because we are we are social beings, and all we have is communication. So it's like the main thing. And when that main thing has been disrupted and is continually disrupted, then it's it's not nice. Like it means that, for instance, it's much easier to avoid being in a social situation than to go through the pain of being triggered. Now, on the flip side of that, when you are in a situation where you're communicating with one or more people, it's usually when it's one on one for me, um, that I'm more triggered. Um, but if you're in this situation where you're communicating with someone, if they manage to say something, or their body language or their facial expressions or whatever, if it happens to be that they say the wrong things, that they have no idea that they're doing it. Maybe sometimes they do. Maybe sometimes they know that they're causing harm, and that's more a form of bullying. But generally, people are unaware of what really causes you this harm and trauma, and the triggering things. So they're just talking. If something happens and it starts setting you off, if you're able to contain it in a way that you're able to keep communicating, and while you're communicating, you say, I'm not going to let this upset me. I'm not going to let this affect our conversation. I'm not going to let this thing change how I'm going to react. I'm just going to continue on as if I wasn't triggered. It's not easy, but you can continue on the conversation. There'll be a pause. There'll be a moment where you acknowledge what's going on here. You'll acknowledge that maybe this person said something that was upsetting to you, whether it was conscious or unconscious. But there'll be like a pause or a moment where you have to basically you have the choice at that moment where you can let it really affect you, in which case the conversation will be pretty much ended there, or you can not let it affect you. And by getting through that while you're still communicating, you still have you have the triggering is still happening and it's still going on, but you're going in this direction, and it's like you're simultaneous, and the longer you can stay on top of it, eventually will sort of it'll fade away and you're able to keep communicating, and you can have a conversation with someone, and you haven't allowed it to end because you've dissociated. You haven't allowed it to go into a negative um, space. A common thing that I would do when confronted with these triggering situations is I would revert to um, self-deprecating. um, I would make fun of myself in front of the other person. I would down I would downplay my abilities. I would make myself out to be an idiot, and that's a protective thing. So in those situations where I'd be triggered, I would, if I let it affect me, it would go. It, generally, of those first two ways would be the conversation would just end because I would dissociate, or I would go down this path of making fun of myself in front of the other person, um, to be submissive, but as a protective measure. But that also shuts down the conversation. And then on the flip side, if I'm able to contain it and control my reaction to the triggering event, and I go through that moment where I pause, but I keep going, and I'm communicating with this other person, and I'm also letting them know that I'm listening to them. So I'm replaying our conversation back to the person, confirming the fact that I'm listening to them, I'm active in the conversation, and that they notice the pause themselves. So in my experience, like when this thing happens to me, the other party is well aware of the triggering of the fact that I've been triggered in some way. Something's popped into my mind that stopped me for a moment. But the very fact that I was able to keep going and to reassure the conversation that, I'm part of the conversation, I'm able to get through that, and then it becomes self-reflective in the sense that by talking about what the other person was saying to reassure them that I was listening to them, the conversation actually becomes about me and the fact that I'm still able to communicate. So for me, that's a big thing that I can manage those situations. It's it is communication is such a difficult it's difficult for everyone, and I think it's much more difficult for those who've been through complex trauma. Learning ways to communicate and express yourself and to rationalize and understand expectations with communication is very, very crucial to have things run smoothly in your life. The more that you become detached from the world, the more you become detached from social groups, the harder it is to actually really connect. So, and that's why for me, this is a big thing is I'm connecting with the world, and it's for my own benefit. But if I can share with others and if others can get something out of it, then that's great. Um, but I'm really working on this communication thing. So being able to talk and continually jump from topic to topic, but also have it connect, that that's a big thing. So for instance, tonight I've been talking about a whole bunch of different things, but there to me it seems like I'm trying to connect it all together and have it relatable and not be all over the shop. That what I'm talking about is simple things, and there's something that and especially communication is something that we all. It's like such a central thing to everything. It, it's like everything is communication in a way. Being able to understand and identify what to say, when to say it, being able to not be upset by having expectations when trying to communicate and then having those expectations destroyed means that you're less likely to be upset by things. So for me, I felt like I have tried to communicate and that people wouldn't understand me. And then so I would shut down and I would communicate less. But what I really need to do is to not stop communicating, but to get better at it. And you get better at communicating by practicing it and being active in it. So I one of the aspects of becoming hypersensitive means that you will actually focus on things in a conversation much more than other people will. So what is important to you and what is something that will upset you more than others, uh, it's like those things are a result of being hypersensitive. So what this means is that you listen in on every word that people are saying, and you apply much more stringent um, you apply much more stringent relationships to the words. So the words themselves become much more potent. What this means is you're already hypersensitive, and then the words become much more potent. You're listening in on every word and focusing in on it so much that you will no doubt become more upset than you should be, and you can't help you can't help this. It's just the nature of being hypersensitive. So in order to counteract this hypersensitivity, you can become blasé or you can become less sensitive. And this is not easy because you already associate much more power to certain words than other people may. By letting go of that power that the words have, there is a sadness associated with that, because from my perspective is that I'll have I'll have so much meaning, and I'll have so much associated with words. If I lessen that, if I make it less powerful, I feel like I've lost the meaning. If they mean less, if the words mean less to me, then there's a sadness, because it's like, well, everything means less now. But you have to make the words mean less in order to not be affected by them so much. So rather than going, well, I'm gonna not get so offended by things. I'm not going to be triggered by these things. I'm going to lessen the power that these words have. You're not actually stopping it altogether, but there is a fear that as soon as you diminish the meaning behind these words, then that they've lost all of their meaning. And that's not the case. But there is a fear that by being more callous, you're less empathic. But you have to find a balance where you're actually just not applying an over exuberance or an over emphasize. Sorry, you're not applying you're not overemphasizing words. So as soon as you realize that by taking some of the power away from these words and diminishing them is not disregarding them altogether. It's just lessening the impact. For me, my emphasis that I have on meaning behind things, and people tell me this, that they say, you care about this stuff so much, like, why do you get so upset about all these things? Why do you care so much about these things? And it's like, well, I do care about these things, and we all should care about these things. But there is a point where when you care too much about these things, they overflow and they flood, they consume you. And that lessening the power and the impact that these words can have doesn't mean that you're disregarding them altogether. But there is that fear that if I stopped caring about these things to the point that I care about them now, I will have lost them. I will have lost the feeling and the care and the meaning that I have associated with these things. But you have to remember that it's not all lost. You just got to lessen the effect. So the words can still have the same meaning, but if you're lessening the effect that they can have, it's putting a filter between you and it. So you're not allowing the whole thing to come through. You're selectively allowing aspects of the meaning behind the words to actually affect you. And it's such a hard thing to such a difficult thing to communicate, this sort of topic. But for me, communication is such a difficult thing, um, for lots of reasons. So some of the, to summarize what I've been talking about is that from complex trauma, you have multiple difficulties with communication. So you have the difficulty in being able to speak, as if this traumatic event or events are things that you can't talk about, or you don't want to share, or you feel like you shouldn't share. So you keep them inside. So you're not communicating. You have the difficulty in social interactions where people communicate to you. When in communication, you dissociate, you get triggered, you get upset. So it causes you to withdraw. And then by being more self aware, by being able to push through the difficulty of navigating communicating with someone and containing the triggers so that you don't let the triggers affect you to the point where you shut down, or you're listening to every single word that they're saying, and which can cause um, misinterpretation. and that's the misinterpreting, the dissonance that you get from someone who's not aware that they've basically triggered you, and so you're going from the two people having a conversation, and suddenly one of the people in the conversation is not on the same wavelength as you, or you're not on the same wavelength as them, and that makes that makes it difficult. So the conversation ends there, or it keeps going. So if you're able to contain the words, not be upset by them, realize that you are being triggered, but you're not going to stop. You're going to pause because you can't help but pausing, but you're going to keep moving. You're going to keep talking. When you can do that, you're able to learn new skills with communication. The more you can have those conversations, not get triggered, and actually have the right response afterwards, you feel so much stronger. And there's nothing worse than being triggered in a conversation and then shutting down or saying the wrong things, or acting like an idiot just to submit to someone because it's a protection measure. None of those things are going to happen, and you're going to look back on it and go, that was good today. I didn't get triggered. I didn't let it affect me in a situation where normally that would affect the conversation. So I think, and you also have to remember that most people aren't thinking about these things. Most people are like just automatically responding to you. And if they're thinking about the conversation, and if they're thinking about the actual act of communicating to the same level that you are, then they're going to be aware of your situation. So being hypersensitive, it's a curse, but you have to remember that it also means you're going to see more. So you're going to read into things much more than other people are. And that doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you're right. It just means that you're going to see more. And you have to remember that most people aren't aware of these intricacies, and they're not actually active in the communication themselves. They're just responding. Often you'll find most people will have a response, basically automatically they're ready to say. And so that doesn't mean that they're not conscious. It's just a sort of aspect of communicating that we will naturally have these unconscious responses. And that's how you can have a conversation can go on for a minute, or it can go on for an hour, and it can just jump from thing to thing and just flow. But the more active you are, in the conversation, and in the more active you are in the conscious acknowledgement of the communication, the more power that the actual conversation will have. And when you have two people that are really communicating to each other, they can become automatic as well, while still being active. And that's, you can have great conversations that way. But communication, it's difficult. Getting your words out is not easy, and especially when you feel like you're not able to speak. Um, but it's something that practicing it and being sympathetic to others, but also not allowing others dominate you. So making sure that communication's fair. It's just not easy. I mean, we got to work at it, and we've got to focus on it, and we have to give allowances. So you have to give allowances to other people for whatever reasons, but it should stop at a point, and we should protect ourselves and preserve ourselves, um, and respect others. So I've I've found there are some really good people out there in the world, and the good people out there they'll communicate to you in a way that isn't going to upset you. Sometimes they'll be good people and they'll communicate and it will upset you, but it's not their fault. I just wanted to say thanks to everyone, anyone who's listening or tuning in. I'm going to keep doing this once a week. Um, yeah, I appreciate it. Much love.